everybody. Welcome to the Game Junkie Show. I'm your host, Crystal, and today we're going to take a little walk down memory lane because it's all about the love for all things retro. Two new first-time guests, which makes me super, super excited. So please welcome to the show today, Brad.
Hello.
And Zwan.
How's it going?
Thanks for being here, guys. So let's just alphabetically, just because, Brad, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about your very first video game that you ever played.
Oh, boy. Hard to recall. I'm 40. But probably, I would guess Pac-Man. At this pizza place we used to go to, I can remember them putting me up on tomato boxes and just kind of turning me loose on the controls. I was probably about 4 years old or so, but first, but most memorable for me, probably a Super Mario Brothers. It's got to be that. That's the one I think that got a lot of kids my age just hooked.
Yeah, Zwan, what about you? What do you remember about your very first video game?
My earliest memory, honestly, is playing Smurfs on ColecoVision. I didn't own one. I went to my grandmother had a cottage in about an hour away from where I lived, and every summer we just go there for the summer. Me and my brother would just hang out there for 2 months. And there was a kid who lived who also went to the cottage every summer, and he had a ColecoVision, and I was just like, "What is that?" And they showed me the Smurfs on ColecoVision. That's my earliest memory. I'm sure I played games before that, but yeah. But Super Mario Brothers and the whole dual cartridge with Duck Hunt is the first game that I know for a fact that I owned, because my parents rented an NES 3 or 4 times before they ever bought one for us, and I remember playing that. But Super Mario Brothers 3 is my first true love game, I think.
Good choice.
I think I remember my first, at least my mom confirms, my uncle got me an Atari 2600 and Joust. He wanted to get me into games, and I just remember, I feel very vividly, I kind of remember, because I'll be 40 this year too, so I just remember the movement. But I think that Mario Brothers era, I think for people around our age, is what really solidified that love for okay. When we played Duck Hunt, Zwan, did you really stand far away from the CRT, or was it
right up to it?
We were right there. Do you guys remember the track? Do you remember the track and field game where you could buy that big? Okay, did you actually use the power pad with your feet, or did you use the hands to make yourself go fast?
Both.
Yep. Both.
So then we all pretty much owned an NES, right? That was the first mainstream. So let's talk. Brad, let's go back to you. Let's talk about what are some games that you would say on the NES just catapulted your love for gaming?
Well, the Christmas I got my NES, obviously I got Mario Duck Hunt. My parents picked me up Excite Bike, as well as the original Metal Gear, which was really brutal for an 8-year-old, but yeah, Excite Bike, definitely. Super Mario Brothers, of course. Mega Man, obviously blew me away. Tons of stuff, of course. Contra over at friends' houses, multiplayer, all the classics. Ninja Gaiden, those were my jams.
Zwan, what about you? What are some of your favorite NES games that you felt just solidified that I'm going to be a gamer the rest of my life?
Final Fantasy. I remember having a subscription with Nintendo Power Magazine and seeing the preview, because that was pre-internet, obviously, right? So all of our stuff was literally whatever they showed us in the magazines, and I literally remember just seeing all the artwork in the margins and stuff of the preview for Final Fantasy. And I was just I have to play this. And I told my mother, can I have this for Christmas? And yeah, I mean, it's, it was the first game that I ever played that it was my first JRPG. I'd played Dragon Quest a little bit before, but yeah. So Final Fantasy 1 on NES.
I don't think I played that. My uncle had the Nintendo, so I only got to play it on the weekends. Every
Mhm.
Saturday and Sunday, I went there and played, and then they finally let me
Hmm.
get a system the Super Nintendo days. But we played a lot of Contra, Double Dragon. You remember that one?
Love
The
that game.
Definitely.
the Ninja Turtles. And now that I
Yeah.
think back, I think my uncle wanted to get me into gaming so much because there was shit he couldn't beat, and my reflexes as a kid,
Uh,
like being like 7 or 8,
Child labor.
beating Ninja Gaiden, it was like a little bit easier than, being older and like, oh, this shit is too fast for me.
mhm.
What
Speaking
a go ahead.
speaking
Somebody.
of Ninja Gaiden, I find it amazing because I remember beating the crap out of that game as a kid, but I played it again like 10 years ago, and I literally was like, how I couldn't even beat half the first level practically. I was just like, how did anyone do this?
Mhm.
So like, yeah, I just want to point
That's
that out.
actually funny because I was going to ask you guys, have you gone back and played anything like I
Mhm.
tried Battletoads again later as I never beat it as a kid, but I
Yeah.
did get far, and I cannot hold a candle to the shit that I used to do when I was little. Like eh, what I mean, why do you think that is?
Reflexes. It's
Definitely.
got to be. Some games like Mega Man 2, I can still beat with my eyes closed, but to this day. But other games, like he said, Ninja Gaiden is a prime example. I threw that on not more than 6 months ago and just got murdered.
Mhm.
So I think certain games that you played maybe, relentlessly as a kid will still be kind of hardwired to the nervous system, but other ones that you kind of just tinkered with, I think you're just toast.
Do you think some of that has to do too with when I was a kid, at least I feel like I was more patient because I didn't have the bullshit of
Yeah,
real life to deal with.
Hmm.
So
definitely.
now it's
Sure.
like when we like work hard, like life is a grind and then we pay bills, do we
Yeah.
want to like put up with a game like Ninja Game? Like do you Zwan, do you think that has that plays some dynamic in it too?
I would say. I mean, for me now, talking about new games for 2 seconds. For me now, when I work 8.5 hours a day, sometimes more, and I commute. So like by the time I get home, I want to play games, but I also don't want to have to repeat the same place over and over and over again anymore. So like, and I find that a lot of it has to just have to do with my energy level. And when I was 10, like I had unbounded energy. It was just literally like, you know, you mean you played for 17 hours straight? I've never done that, but like, like, so it's kind of that whole thing, I think.
I probably have done that. I know there was a
Yeah.
period of time, I will admit, as an adult, I don't know how old I was, but it was around the PS3 era because we're all close in age, so that puts it into
Yep.
perspective. But I remember my mom letting herself into my apartment, and she was like, "Chris, have you eaten?" Nope. And I'm like playing Call of Duty online, probably like the 80th hour that week when I went through that COD phase, and she's like, "Have you cleaned your apartment this week?" Probably not. She's like, "Have you showered?" Yeah. What day is it? Sunday? I showered Friday. She's like, turn it off, get up. Like, so I will admit that did happen to me. Like, I have done that before. What did you guys think being right? So being kids, what did you think of the transition from the NES to the Super Nintendo?
I think
Mind
it
blowing.
blew us all away, right? I, I mean, that to me, that's the biggest jump, isn't it?
I mean, it was pretty massive. Brad,
Yeah.
what would you say? Like, what was that big SNES game that just had
Oh,
you hooked?
it's Final Fantasy 4. That's the one. I actually got mine. I think maybe a year after launch. Friends had it. Mario World's great. A lot of good fun. But you're right. Didn't find that killer app. I don't think until I saw Final Fantasy 4 in action. Final Fantasy 2 to us at the time, of course. None of us knowing that the 2 and 3 had come out under our noses, so to speak. But yeah, Final Fantasy 4 is the one. Um, the RPGs in general on SNES, just that I was just locked in.
Juan, what about you? Well, probably. I
I
mean, you're a
actually,
Final
I,
Fantasy
I
guy.
honestly have to say it's exactly the same thing. Like I loved a bunch of stuff. Super Nintendo and Genesis are like literally my two favorite consoles, I think. Please don't anyone unfollow me or hate on me for any of that. But like, um, but the Super Nintendo was like an amazing system. But yeah, Final Fantasy 2, just because it showed me that you could actually tell a story with a video game. Like other video games had like the little story bits, but it was just kind of like to move the levels along. But Final Fantasy 2, Final Fantasy 4 was literally the first time I was just like, wait a minute, like this is just like a movie. So
yeah.
As the systems progressed and as we got older, do you feel like your tastes in game, because you still like Final Fantasy, so some of your tastes have been really strong since you were really little.
Almost all of them are pretty much the same.
Really?
We've added some things, like I'm not really a shooter guy, I never really have been. I've been playing role-playing games since I was a little guy.
See, it sounds like I started on a lot of the same games that you guys did on NES, but not so much the narrative stuff, because my uncle was really big into the shoot 'em ups. And then I was really big, pretty much with me, it was sports, shoot 'em up, and racing. I was very myopic and kind of stuck with those. For me, I think it was,
Same.
for me, it was PS2, and it was Indigo Prophecies was the title that changed my whole mind. It was Quantic Dream. It was David Cage's first.
Yes.
Yeah, but oh, that's right, because you're where you are. I think it is.
No, it was called Indigo Prophecy as well. I'm just
no, but you are right for saying that, because there are people globally that are checking this out. And I'm like, what the hell is that? It's called Fahrenheit. I think in most other countries, that is what hooked me to the whole idea of like narrative journeys and story arcing and RPGs and stuff.
The only downside to that game was there's a sex scene in it with music from Nickelback playing. So like, just
I had successfully blocked that out.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Friends don't let friends listen to Nickelback, do they?
I'm watching YouTube videos now.
We're unsubscribed. Somebody's unsubscribing right now. Somebody's turning off the radio in the car. What about handhelds? Were you like? Did you get into the hand? You had a Game Boy, right?
Sure.
What were your jams on Game Boy?
I got it with Tetris, and I want to say Follow the Foot Clan that Christmas, and then big on the Final Fantasy Legend, Final Fantasy Adventure as well. Obviously Zelda. Great Game Boy game. Played the hell out of Tetris a lot too.
Yeah, and Dr. Mario. Zwan, what about you? What were your big Game Boy?
I started off with the handhelds, just like I guess we all did. Game Boy. We found out the extent of Nintendo's warranty system, like literally the first day we had a Game Boy, because my parents bought me and my brother both Game Boys, and I don't know the specifics, but for however it worked out, I broke my brother's Game Boy, and it was probably a fight, and I basically like smashed it off the corner of our coffee table. I'm not an angry person. I used to be, maybe, but so we found out how deep they actually do. My dad literally called them later, and they sent us a new one within a week, warranty, because they're not supposed to break. So long story short, I started with Game Boy, and I loved it. But then I took a really big long break. So it wasn't until SP came out.
Now that you say it, when you talk about how durable it was, holy shit! Maybe we should talk a little bit about how durable Nintendo's products are still durable.
Other than drift, but anyway, we won't talk about that.
More unsubscribe. But yeah, Nintendo just I know it's interesting because the new consoles do a lot of things that Nintendo. I don't know if Nintendo's going to move forward and say we're going to do 4K gaming and high frames per second, but they make some really durable shit.
Yeah. There's a Famicom Disk System back here that still runs from 1985, imported. It's unbelievable that it still works.
It's almost a little strange. You can tell that you're somewhere around an early 80s baby if you have like an old Nintendo system that still works on an old Sony TV. I feel like that was like the dynamic, like, is that like the apex of?
Yeah.
What other, you said you got an SP, Zwan? I'm trying
Yeah.
to think of what portable that was, and I'm
Oh, the
drawing a
Game
blank.
Boy. Game Boy Advance SP. Sorry.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I didn't go through the whole like color, um, the Game Boy Color or any of the other, or the Game Boy Mini, I think it was called. I'm sorry, or like the regular Game Boy Advance. But once the SP came out, I bought that and the Final Fantasy 1 and 2 collection.
Mm-hmm. Dawn of
I
Souls.
think. Sorry.
Dawn of Souls, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reaon why I bought the Game Boy SP, was so I could friggin' play that. So
I didn't even realize that you were both Final Fantasy buffs. I mean, Brad's shirt should have clued me, but I didn't know that. Do you want to? I mean, Final Fantasy's retro as shit. Do you want to spend a little time like reminiscing on like the history of Final Fantasy and like kind of the journey of what it started like and what it is today? Because a lot of old
it's
school
changed.
gamers started on Final Fantasy.
Yeah. Most definitely. Well, I played Dragon Quest first, and I really enjoyed it. But when Final Fantasy came out, it was just a whole new world. You could mix and match your characters. More than one class going on. The narrative was a lot more advanced than Dragon Quest was. Final Fantasy owes a lot to Dragon Quest, but
Definitely.
it was all on its own. It was just incredible, mind blowing. I'll never forget it.
How do you feel, Zwan? How do you fit? And I here comes another unsubscribe. I haven't played Final Fantasy a lot, so I apologize to some
It's all
folks
good.
out there who are like wildly unfollowing me. What are explain to me, what are some drastic differences from the Final Fantasies of the older days and the older consoles and what we have now?
It's got to be like the narrative, like as Brad was saying earlier, like the first one was narratively denser than Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest, but it still wasn't like super dense, especially for an NES game. But as the Final Fantasy games go, they get more and more. I guess they get more and more Japanese feeling as well, because like you can't. Like I don't know, I don't get a huge crazy Japanese vibe off of the first couple of Final Fantasy games, other than them being JRPGs, obviously. But like as they go, they definitely open up and they get quite a bit more like just all over the place, in a good way. I don't know how to describe that.
And now I didn't get into the story arcing games and like the heavy narrative journey until Indigo Prophecy. But I didn't play a lot of games like that at the time because I think I was still I was also in college at some point and I didn't really have much time to. So was JRPGs a much bigger genre compared to, did we just not have as many Western RPGs at the time? Or do you think it was just kind of a marketing shift? Or
I've always seen it as we had a lot of Western RPGs on PC, but because Nintendo and Sega were Japanese companies, that's kind of where they brought their games in. So I feel as though, because I've always heard that they came up with Dragon Warrior, as like a response to Western RPGs. It was like kind of their their vibe, like they're like, hey, let's make our RPGs.
So games like Final Fantasy were kind of maybe in a way kind of spearheading the idea that more RPGs can come to a console generation, essentially. So that
they played off of each other a lot too. The idea of the Western RPG has changed a lot since the early '80s. It's a fact. And he's right. Dragon Quest was a response to Ultima, to Wizardry, right? Which were these kind of really complicated PC games with 1,000 buttons and commands. And the idea was, let's take what we love about Wizardry and Ultima, leveling up, the narratives, let's take everything we love and let's boil it down to a D-pad and 2 buttons. And that was the birth of the JRPG. And then you see the Western RPG influenced by the JRPG later in the decade, when you start to see them take the idea from the JRPG and then make it more action-oriented, which is what I think we call the Western RPG now.
And now you look at the newer versions of JRPGs, and they're starting to get a lot more action oriented as well, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy 15. So it's crazy.
Definitely.
It's awesome.
Very interesting.
It's cool. Very, very cool.
I feel like Nintendo's model, right? If we look at the original Nintendo and then we look at the Switch, right? Their model has been pretty consistent. I mean, their platformers have really kind of stayed the same over generations, wouldn't you say? But then some titles like Zelda have drastically changed. I mean, do you think that's just to appeal to newer gamers? Or, I mean, maybe we can talk about that a little bit. It was very different for us to grow up in the gaming age we did versus so many people that come in. And I always forget that. I assume everybody came in when I came in, and I forget that, like, well, I came in with the PS4, I came in with the Genesis, like, so Brad, why don't you talk a little bit about like your thoughts on that whole dynamic?
Well, if you look at your NES sequels, right? With the exception, we all know that Super Mario 2 wasn't the real Super Mario 2, but look at Zelda 2, Super Mario 2. Back then we didn't have like, this is what a Mario game is, this is what a Zelda game is. So they tried different things. That was commonplace, where the sequel to a game was totally different. Also, a sequel to a game could be essentially the same as the last. Look at Mega Man. Look at Ninja Gaiden. They're all essentially kind of the same. You give different music and levels, and with Ninja Gaiden, it's got a narrative, which is really cool. Love that stuff. But you look at a series like Dragon Quest too. A great example is, if you play Dragon Quest, you can play Dragon Quest 11. You just can. It's changed. A lot of it's changed. It's gotten more dynamic, more, but it's essentially the same damn game, which I love so much. I love that about Dragon Quest. The sights and sounds are familiar. Mechanics change, but the series does not.
I feel like that's a lot of, I mean, I got burnt out on Call of Duty, I think maybe about 400 years ago with the 75th Call of Duty that they brought out, which had like the flying packs or some shit. I don't even remember. But I feel like, I mean, that game's always kind of the same, right? It's new. I'm not dogging on it. It's new maps and it's new. So some games really kind of stay the same, or then you look at games like The Last of Us and you're like, well, these are the same characters and they feel the same, but the mechanics are completely overhauled, and like so many of the functions are overhauled. So Zwan, let me ask you this, because part of me thinks gaming was harder back then because we didn't have the technical documentation, right? Developers had limited access with code. They could only polish so much. Like, I read somewhere that Battletoads was literally created, part of the difficulty was on accident, and they didn't know how to fix it. I don't know if that's true.
I don't know. But it sounds right.
Do you think we've had so many people introduced to the gaming community since then? Do you think overall, if we look at consumers as a whole, there's less patience? So if all games were that same kind of challenge, or had that same kind of limitation, do you think it would turn more people off, or what would look different?
Well, I think we can just look at the way the gaming community talks about difficulty in games today, like nowadays. We've all seen it on our timelines on Twitter. So there's almost a genre right now that almost dedicated to people who want that insane difficulty. And we all know what I'm talking about. From software, But so like, I honestly do feel as though most games nowadays are kind of skewed a little on the easier side in general. And then a lot of that has to do with the fact that back when we were coming up in games, games were still, I wouldn't call it embarrassment, but like, you didn't really necessarily have conversations with random people about video games unless they were wearing like a Mario shirt or you knew that they played video games. Whereas nowadays, like, everyone plays video games. Literally everyone plays video games. My girlfriend's mom plays like Bejeweled and all those different things. And she's, in her 70s. So everyone plays video games. And I just feel as though at this point, in order to keep people from just quitting video games, because not everyone has the patience levels as, like dyed-in-the-wool gamers, they just keep the difficulty just kind of is at a little lower baseline at this point, I think.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because when you said everybody plays video games,
I don't care. I love it personally. So
yeah, when you said everybody plays video games, I was going to go, no, Zwan, that's not. Wait a minute, holy shit! I think everyone does. Like mobile games are huge. I mean, that's what pushed microtransactions in a console state. That's I
forget about mobile gaming a lot.
Yeah, and I know that there are a lot of here come the unsubscribes, but some mobile gaming is not gaming is video games are video games. It's
true.
You may not like mobile games, but I think it's significantly the biggest gaming market right now. So let's do something fun, just random and fun, because that's what this show is. Brad, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Take your favorite system, whatever it is, your favorite system and your favorite game from that system. And a young person walks into the room, okay, and they haven't gamed before the current generation. Sell them on that video game. Tell them why they need to play that game on that system.
Oh boy. But I mean, I'm having a hard time even figuring out which game to start with.
I'm so sorry.
Let me just I'll randomly pick Chrono Trigger. It's a great introduction to JRPGs, which obviously is my favorite genre ever. So, I could sell the crap out of that game. Just flip it on. It's beautiful to look at, Toriyama style. Everything's awesome. And the colors and the music and the characters, there's such a wide variety of characters. The time traveling story is brilliant. There's a ton of stuff, a ton of like little Easter eggs and little conversations you can have if you travel through time before and after events. It could appeal to almost anyone. The game's not difficult to the point where no one can best it. If you're struggling, all you have to do is hang out and level up a little bit. So I think that is pretty forgiving. I feel like the JRPG genre is very forgiving for a new person also, since you really kind of can't lose if you're willing to put the time in. Plus, I think people are used to narratives in their movies and TV shows as it is. So, it's not too gamey, so to speak.
That's it. That was a really great job. I totally threw this on y'all with.
I just picked a random game that I love,
Zwan, you want to give it a try? You want to try to sell one of these young bucks on?
Ironically, Chrono Trigger was like my second choice of like what I was going to talk about. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I feel like I'm one of the weird ones. But I love Final Fantasy. I want to be clear on that. Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, all that stuff. But my personal favorite JRPG series is the Phantasy Star series. Phantasy Star 4 on the Sega Genesis is the epitome of my favorite. Like, I play through it like every year almost. Like, I'll buy all the different like retro things so I can play it. And so that's my little background on it. How I'd explain it to a young person would be like, do you like anime? Everyone nowadays loves anime. And the Phantasy Star 4 games are like one of the first few games that I've noticed where they went kind of a little harder in on like actually having cool artwork. So when the story bits are happening, it's a 16-bit game, so they still didn't have like the sweeping like cinematic videos. So they fill it in with manga and like anime artwork. And so I think that really fits with kids these days still. The game is a little harder than the Final Fantasy games as far as like once you get about 5 or 6 hours in, it just starts to punish the shit right out of you, unless you read a tutorial or whatever, I guess. But it's an easy sell, I think, especially for games that we all grew up with these days. Any of these games are easy sells to kids these days. I did not use the phrase "kids" these days. I'm sorry.
Unsubscribe.
For young people getting into games these days, like the NES and the Super Nintendo and the Genesis is really easy for people to sell people these days because that's what the indie market is nowadays. Like, look at Eastward coming out. It's going to be on Switch. It looks like a Sega Genesis game that has been like amped up to like 1 billion. It looks awesome. So I find that it's really easy to sell 16-bit games to almost anyone at this point. So I would sell Phantasy Star 4 because it's got a really rich anime plot. It's like fantasy, it's sci-fi, it's got, characters die, like special characters come back. It's just all over the place. I think, the epitome of JRPGs in that era for me. So
you said something and it made me think. So now I want to ask you guys this question. Is part of the appeal of Nintendo, we know Nintendo has appeal because they were the first big people to pioneer gaming. They're durable. It's family-friendly games. Do you think a part of the appeal might be that so many of their games really feel old school? Like they still have a lot of that more simplified, older approach. Like my wife describes it as busy. With these new games, she likes it, but she's like, they're so busy. There's a lot more buttons that you have to push and but the games can still be very challenging, especially platformers on the Switch, but they have that older fundamental mentality. Like Brad, what do you think about that?
Sure. Well, when you started talking about busy and the buttons, you reminded me that all of my older cousins fell out of gaming the minute the N64 and the PlayStation came out. You add a couple extra buttons, you start adding analog sticks, and it just freaked out the Pac-Man generation. The Atari stick kids just. I don't want to speak for all of them, but I think almost all of my older cousins and friends just fell completely off at that point. So, you're right. You kind of, either loved it enough to stick with it, or you just bailed out when it got too complicated.
I didn't even think about that. I had assumed more people would come in because I looked at it. I mean, when I got my first Sony PlayStation, I'm like,
more people did come in, just younger kids that had, they picked, a lot of kids picked that up for the first time.
That's true.
The first controller they had in their hands was an N64 controller. There's an analog stick right in the middle. They're controlling cameras, in Mario 64. A lot of people just couldn't get the twin stick thing down. I think it freaked a lot of people out.
No, you're right. I didn't realize that a lot of gamers that had come in were younger than me. It took me a long time to get my uncle adjusted to like playing on the difference in buttons. Zwan, what's your opinion on kind of the dynamic shift there?
Yeah, the controls definitely agreed. But I also find that if you look back, when I go back to my old games, this NES, Super Nintendo, and Genesis, they all still look good. They look good. And but when you start looking at old PS1 games, I was having a conversation with a coworker yesterday about this exact thing. How PlayStation 1 games look like garbage now. And I don't mean that as a diss. They're like, I have great memories of playing PlayStation 1 games, but PlayStation 1 games is kind of the reason why the remaster is a thing these days, because I'm sure like it's just, they're hard to look at. There's an aesthetic to them for sure. And so when I see that stuff, I'm like, I got memories. But to sit down and play a PlayStation 1 game that isn't a 2D game is difficult. Like it's just like and we get that, like the N64 had that too. Like looking back at the N64, it didn't age well graphically. So I find that I think that's one of the main reasons is because you can go back and pop in Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past on any TV. Doesn't matter if it's an HD TV or an old tube TV or whatever, it still feels right. Whereas Metal Gear Solid, unremastered, untouched on a regular TV, just looks like a jumble of mess at this point. Because we're used to 4K, we're used to all that stuff. I don't know. It's just, I think that's why people can relate to 8 and 16-bit stuff, because it just looks good.
That does make sense. I have a neighbor who's a huge Nintendo guy, and he's never had any other system. He hasn't seen my newer. I mean, I've sent him some pictures, and he's like, "That's a video game? What? What?" But like, if you're not used to it, and you like, if you haven't played at 60 frames per second or 120, you don't know what you're, you know what I mean, missing. So I mean,
Yep.
sometimes I'll go back to like PS3, or I'll plug in the NES Mini to play Excite Bike on the TV, which is entirely too big, and the pixel density on it is awful, but it's still Excite Bike, and it's that
Yeah.
nostalgic, like,
Exactly.
oh my god, love Excite Bike. But like, yeah, that is a thing. Or I'll go back and be like, oh my god, this is 30 frames per second. How did I play that? So maybe I do kind of see that now is I mean, Nintendo market is so big; those people are like, I don't care that it's 400K and 59,000 lines of resolution. I just want family friendly games.
Exactly.
So then why don't we take a little bit of time to gush? Brad, I'll start with you. Why don't you take a little bit of time to gush about your favorite system? Whatever system it is, just talk it up, man. Just gush about it.
Favorite system. I guess I gotta hand it to. Okay, now are we talking? What era, or are we talking like what games are available? Because I mean, the Nintendo Switch is absolutely fantastic.
I
It
mean, that's up to
spans
you.
it spans generations. I mean, I can play NES, SNES, new games, GameCube stuff that gets remastered. So, but I mean, if we're talking just straight up like what games came out for this console, we're probably talking Super Nintendo for me. We hit it earlier. I was a little late to the game, maybe a year and a half late on that because I just, didn't see anything too exciting. But yeah, the Super Nintendo's JRPG library just cemented it for me. Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest before it. Those were the games I was looking for. Final Fantasy VI is on that console. Chrono Trigger that I mentioned before. Also, a slew of stuff that is a lot less popular. If you really dig into that library, it's unbelievable. Add to that the platformers that are available for it. I think by and large for me, as far as I don't know, maybe it's because I'm an old man. Maybe it's because I was really getting excited about video games as it was coming out. But for me, that console just has it all. There's nothing it's really missing. You can find a game in nearly any genre on that console, and it holds up. Like you said, the PS1, there's a certain era of games. It's like the ugly teenage phase for video games, where it's that transition between 2D and 3D. Colors were weird, borders were weird, everything was a polygon. It's why that 16-bit era translates, and the Super Nintendo for me is the one. I had a TG16, I had a Genesis too, but nothing. My SNES was the workhorse through my entire teens. I just love it to death.
That is so. I forget how much like people our age saw, like how much change we
Yeah.
saw to gaming. I mean, we were alive pre-internet age, and then the like coming to the internet age, and
So
then
much.
like so we just experienced so much, which is pretty crazy.
Mhm.
Zwan, I think I know your favorite console. I think it's the Genesis, but why don't you
Yes.
why don't you take some time to gush on that?
As I said earlier, I started with the NES, and then we got the Super Nintendo. But about a year into my Super Nintendo career, whatever you want to call it, my dad brought home a Sega Genesis with Phantasy Star 2, Golden Axe, and Altered Beast.
Right.
And I had played the arcade version of Altered Beast, and I was like, "This is a cool game." So me and my brother got to play it at home, and it was great. And I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with like its actual technical aspects. The way the Genesis produced music was better than the NES, the Super Nintendo. Different, maybe. I don't really want to like sling anything, because like the Super Nintendo is good too. Don't get me wrong, but like in my mind, the Genesis just had more like audio range when it came to like producing music. So that always stuck with me. And the one thing I think we all forget nowadays, when it gets to like PlayStation versus Xbox, when you look at PlayStation and Xbox, they're by all means identical from a hardware perspective. They're the same thing. Different controllers, different exclusives. They're the same thing. Sorry, unsubscribe. But back versus SNES versus Genesis, they were actually different hardware. Games on Genesis looked different than Super Nintendo games, and games that were made for both systems were different games. Like you had TMNT,
Hyperstone Heist.
Hyperstone Heist, exactly. And it was it was the same release, but it was two different games. And they were different games. It was awesome. And I don't know. I just think I just fell in love with the Genesis experience more than SNES, even though it's like literally, it's hard. I have to choose Genesis because I love it, but it's almost neck and neck. So
I want to say, and Genesis, I actually didn't own. I don't think there's a single Sega console I owned. Unsubscribe. But the neighbors owned it, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up, so we switched. I feel like what Genesis did with Sonic, and I'm not as skilled as you, Zwan, so you'll have to make sure I'm being correct here. I feel like what they did with Sonic, like the speeds in which that game produced, I don't think they could have done that on the Super Nintendo.
I don't know the technicals, but you're probably right.
I just feel like I remember like going, "Holy shit, what is this wizardry?" Like I'd never seen anything like that. I think I'm gonna lean with Brad on this one. That the Super Nintendo was everything. That Super Mario World was absolutely insane. Like the jump of coming from Mario on the NES to that was just insanity. And riding Yoshi, Street Fighter 2, Mega Man X. I have to give Methodical a shout out. The Donkey Kong games were phenomenal. Donkey Kong 2, the music, like the multiplayer aspect, the challenge. That was a time to be a gamer.
Definitely.
Like that was insane. And the Genesis game, I would go over to the neighbor's house on the weekend, and these Genesis games are so awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Just fantastic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed X-Men on Genesis, just an aside.
Yep.
Yeah.
Road Rash, another one that I love.
Yep.
Oh my God, Road Rash I played it on PS1, but I loved the original Road Rash.
Just as a side note, the EA Genesis story, anyone watching, you guys should all look it up and like
Tell us about it.
It's really long, and I'm not like a professional on it. I just watched a video a couple of weeks ago, but like they legitimately, like EA was like, "Hey, we want to make games for your system." They go to talk to Nintendo. Nintendo's like, "We want a whole bunch of money," and they're like, "We're a small upstart company, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to pay money." So I guess they figured out how to like reverse engineer is the word I'm looking for. Reverse engineer like the Sega cartridges, and they started making their own like pirate games. That's why when you look at Sega Genesis cartridges from EA, they're bigger and they've got that little yellow slot thing on the side. It's because they were never allowed to originally like make games for Genesis. They were
unlicensed.
Yeah. It's just a whole crazy story about how Genesis and EA, and it's kind of it's something that people should look into. It's really an interesting story.
That's actually really cool. I didn't know that. I know
it was like the Wild West back then.
That is pretty crazy. I remember Sega Genesis had this great football game, and I don't remember what it was called, but we played
Mutant League Football.
We played it every Sunday. My neighbor TJ's house. We played it every Sunday, and he would always get the team with Bo Jackson and just bowl my ass. So it was like the most ridiculous, unreasonable physics you can imagine. Like Bo Jackson can run a 900-yard touchdown like 4 times up and down the field, and nobody could touch him. I can't remember the name of it.
That sounds like Tecmo Bowl.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
probably. But we played it on the Genesis, and it's like how much fun that is. Going back, it's kind of crazy because we're like, we found this phenomenal. But if you think about it,
Mhm.
for the time, it was fucking phenomenal.
Mhm.
Like it's
Genesis had a fantastic sports library. NHL, John Madden, like they cornered the market on sports games for sure.
Yep.
Less RPGs for me. If you want to, go back and forth about the Mortal Kombat thing, I think Super Nintendo's a better port. I think it just looks better, minus the blood. Whatever, cry about it. The Super Nintendo controller to me is superior on Street Fighter. But
Definitely.
Genesis really had it going on with the sports games.
Definitely. But Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball owned them all.
that was good. That was really good. So then let me ask you this. Because there's so many games, right? You said Road Rash, Brad, and I had forgotten. I want a Road Rash reboot so bad. Like, what a great game that was. What would you guys, Brad, I'll start with you. What like older game would you want to see rebooted into the new current gen, that one of the games that hasn't been around in a while?
This might be cheating. I don't know if because it's we're still kind of going and Konami's in a mess, but I've been begging for years for a Igavania collection. Like I really want those to come back. We had Bloodstained, which was awesome to me. I really dug the vibe there. Kind of that game was a little janky for me. I think it crashed a lot on me, unfortunately, but I played the heck out of that game. So I love those kind of games. That's going to be my vote. Let's get back to that. Who knows if it's going to be Castlevania or if it's going to be something else. But I'd really like to see that happen. But yeah, I frequently think about Road Rash. I really do. I think there's a giant hole in the market for a game like that. Mario Kart scratches that itch because you've got the racing / kind of combat thing going on, but nothing like Road Rash, where you're running from the cops and you're, racing against others. And Road Rash was awesome. So I'm going to cheat again and say Road Rash.
It's such a good game. Like, I mean, Split Second was fun if you ever played that. I think it was a PS3 exclusive, and I think it was a Disney game. They made a couple bangers and then dropped off, but that was really fun. And that a little bit gave me that Road Rash itch, but it's not the same as hauling ass on a motorcycle and beating the shit out of someone with a pipe. It's just not the same. Zwan, what would you want to see rebooted? What's like an old, phenomenal retro game?
Skitchin. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. Skitchin was like an offshoot of the whole Road Rash thing where you were on rollerblades. It was bad. Road Rash is always one of those games I'd love to have a modern, but I think a lot of Road Rash wouldn't work anymore because of like GTA and some of that kind of stuff. It's just, unfortunately, but it's a great option, right? I'd like to see Squaresoft just bite the bullet and start releasing like good console ports of their old games. I want the Pixel remasters on PlayStation 5. I'll have them on Xbox and Switch. I want them on everything. I legitimately want them on everything. So that's kind of my take, is that I would love to see some of the companies that have the gems remaster in a nice way their old games and release them, because like there's a market for people to pay money for that. I have spent so much time and energy downloading ROMs and finding ways of playing these games that are not quite legal, and I want to give these companies my money. Like I don't know if they understand that I want to give them my money to play their games. So that's my thing. That's what I want. I want Chrono Trigger on PlayStation, Switch, and Xbox. I want that. I have it on my PC. Looks great on PC on Steam. The Steam version looks great. Just give me that. But give me trophies, give me some achievements, whatever you got to do that. That's what I want. That's the stuff that I would like. It's much like Brad had said. It's less of one game and it's more of like an idea.
No, that does make sense. If Daddy Jim Ryan, right? If Papa Ryan, came to dinner with me one day and he says, would you pay me to have back compatibility so you can play your PS3 library on a PS5, even if we don't drastically do anything to improve the performance, just let you access it from the same machine so I don't have to have 400 consoles? I would be like, Jim, here's a blank check. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm not a rich gal, but take it all. Just take it. Take it, Jim. Give me access to the older games with the better. Can I just point out, I love PS3. Here comes another unsubscribe. That was the most tiny, childlike, ridiculous, worst remote ever. Is that not the worst remote? That's probably.
I hate it. I'm
I
sorry.
hate it.
Pretty rough.
It feels like a toy.
It does.
I mean, I guess it is a toy technically, but you know.
I go back to PS3 games and like, I really can't. Like, these are my spoiled first world problems. Is I can't play this game. I can deal with the resolution. I can deal with the FP. I cannot deal with this little bitty ass baby controller.
Do you have a PS4 controller?
I have met several, of course. I have a bunch.
Yeah. You can Bluetooth connect that to your PS3.
Are you shitting me?
No, I'm not shitting you.
No,
I was over 39 and a half years old when I learned that, which is today.
Pro tip.
Are you sick? Look, you've just changed my life. I'll be messaging you at some point like, Zwan, how do I do the thing you said to do with the damn
It's
controls?
Easy. We'll figure you out.
See, how insane is that? So before we kind of start the wrap up process, what did we not talk about that you guys want to talk about? What is a retro system or handheld or game or like ideology that we didn't talk about that we missed that needs to be shown love?
I mean, I when I think of retro stuff, I think of Super Nintendo and Genesis, and playing Diablo 1 on PlayStation 1. Horrible. Anyway, I love Diablo, but yeah, that the only thing I think we missed out on really is the transfer between like 16-bit to 32-bit. We were talking about how the NES leap to SNES was like the biggest, and I agree in a lot of ways. But I also feel that the going from the 2D to 3D was like almost like a seismic shift in gaming, both for good and bad. Because I like that's where people started using like the same engine for multiple games, which is both good and bad because you can see it get really abused in the PlayStation 2 era, especially where games started to look the same because you knew it was an Unreal game or whatever. They've done really good at making Unreal, and a lot of the engines that they use nowadays look totally different. But back in the PS1, PS2 era, 3D was both an amazing advancement, and it also just led to a lot of, I don't want to call anyone lazy. I hate when people call devs lazy because they're not. But it led to a lot of, to a certain level of complacency with the way games were made.
That's actually a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because we did well at this point. That is a little bit retro, isn't it? If you really think about it, where we're at now and how many years it's been, that was a huge, that was a huge, huge shift. It really was. That was another dynamic shift for me on PS3. Another Quantic Dream title, Heavy Rain. What they did with, and that was kind of in the infancy of this really advanced mocap technology, and that's like that. I mean, that's normal. That's what we're doing all the time now, and that was really kind of solidified and brought to fruition. And I remember on a PS3 going, "Oh my god, it's never going to get any better than this!" Like I was blown away at what. Did you guys want to talk about that a little bit? Talk a little bit about some of the shifts there.
I remember seeing the body actors for Heavy Rain and being like, "Holy crap, they look the exact same!" Like it was the first time I'd ever noticed. It was the first time I think they really actively used the actor and made them look the same. Well, actually, on Prophecy, Indigo Prophecy, I always got a kick out of how David Cage put himself in the game.
Yeah.
In the tutorial, I thought that was like, that's a whole different conversation, but yeah, so like for PlayStation 3, like exactly like the same kind of thing where all of a sudden you're just like these actors are like the people doing the voices and it's their faces. It's normal now. It's normal now. Like you just see you see all of the stuff. Like they just base everyone on all characters on people basically.
But that was at least for me personally, that's the first title I experienced that with because I looked up. Because we had this cool thing then called the internet, which wasn't really like that old yet. And I was like, holy shit. I mean, the chick who played Paige, like every detail of her curve and like all of Ethan's face, his eyes, and how this is insane. Like and now it's like, it's normal. I mean, we took Ashley Johnson and said, we're going to change her up a little bit. Like, it's just the, the shift is so different. Brad, is there anything you kind of want to touch on that
Yeah, don't
attention?
look at don't look at me. Like I thought it could never get better after Alone in the Dark or Out of This World or
Love that game.
Mist. When Mist came out, and I was like, oh my god, it's never going to get any better than this. So don't look at me. I'm frequently flabbergasted by what these guys do. Hats off. It's video games rock.
Don't they?
I'm always blown away by video games, so don't ask me that question.
But I do that every generation. Every
Mhm.
generation, every new console, I
Yep.
get super excited. Hold on, sorry, I had the dog. She's barking. Somebody is walking 400 miles away and probably
How
sneezed, and she
dare they.
noticed it. Every single generation, I go, oh my god, this is it. This is like, they're never
Yeah.
going to do every single time. I mean,
Yeah, but in different ways, right? Like
yeah,
maybe the jump from PS4 to PS5, we don't notice like as much in the graphics, so to speak, but like the draw distances and the movement of things, and like how many things can move at the same time on the screen. Everything's so much more liquid.
Or how
It
fast
is.
everything loads.
Oh yeah,
or how
load
fast it
times.
moves. I mean, on consoles now, there are some games you can play at 120 frames per second. That is
Mhm.
mind blowing from when we were little. And really, but games are so different now. The margin of error is so much smaller from a programming level. So you see more bugs, and you see
Mhm.
more crashes, and you see imperfections more. And I'm with Zwan. I don't like that some people in the community can be so casual about calling out developers, I mean, mistakes are going to be made. The margin of error is minuscule, whereas back in the
Mhm.
day, it was, I mean, you could
Yeah.
fuck up code this big, and you could still get through the game,
Sure.
essentially. So yeah, anything else you guys want to cover before we wrap up, to make sure that we have shown everything love that deserves love today?
Um, I'll give you one of my regrets of as a retro gamer is that I regret not giving some of the more obscure consoles of the day more love, like the Neo Geo, or
Ooh.
I played whenever I went to the Radio Shack at the mall in my hometown in the '90s. They always had like a TurboGrafx 16 set up as like a demo, and I always loved to play it. But every time I brought up the idea of buying one, my parents were like, "Well, you've got a Sega Genesis and you've got a Nintendo at home,
Mhm.
so like you don't need a TurboGrafx 16." And the Neo Geo, we had our rental place, like the home video place we always rented games and movies at, had a relatively small library of Neo Geo, and they rented the console out. So we had one. I had one once for a weekend, and it was great. But when I looked at how much it cost to buy the console for yourself, it was like $600
Mhm.
in '90s money.
Yeah.
Like,
A lot.
but obviously the Neo Geo also output in arcade level graphics,
Mhm.
and that's what us retro gamers always chased. You'd go to the arcade at the mall and you'd be like, look at the graphics of these games. And then
Mhm.
you go home to your home console and be like, someday games will look as good as the arcade games. And then arcade died, and but
Can I just point out that all three of us are at a beautiful. Sometimes I complain about my age, but Zwan just said several things that made me feel so fucking excited that I'm about to be
Same.
40 for three things. Well, I'd forgotten the Neo Geo. Another unsubscribe. I'm so sorry. We had Radio Shacks, which were awesome. And we
Yep.
could go to this place called Blockbuster. Maybe you've heard of it.
Mhm.
And you could rent systems, and you could
Mhm.
rent video games. And like, that's insane. You could go to the Radio Shack and buy games, or the Toys R Us and buy. You could get. Do you guys remember the Sears catalogs, the wish list,
Sure.
where like
Circling
Yep.
all the stuff you wanted.
yes, 8 months before Christmas, you circle the video game shit you want and like give it to
Mhm.
somebody who cares.
And sometimes you'd see a game that you hadn't even heard of in the wish book 6 months before it came out, and you're like, wait a minute, they're making that game? And you'd be like super excited.
What about
Mhm.
the weird peripherals that hardly anybody owned? You remember the Nintendo
Mhm.
Power Glove and
Sure.
that big bazooka thing?
Yep.
Yeah, or the Uverse that was kind of you control things with your hands.
Yes. Oh my
Or
God.
yeah, like those were awesome. The fighting game one where like it translated your karate moves into like moves into
Mhm.
the game. It never worked really though. So
How about the Rollin' Rocker? Does anyone know about that unit?
mm,
No.
So, do you guys remember those? Wow, I'm really going to date myself now. You remember those pogo balls? Right? So essentially,
yeah,
it
yes,
was like two dodgeballs with like a plastic platform between them that you could kind of
Yes.
grip with your. I mean, and I don't know anyone who didn't wipe out immediately, but they had a device that was similar, but you connected it to your Nintendo, and you would lean left or lean right or lean forward to move to move the character, and it had a daisy chained the controller to your hand so you could use the buttons while you kind of rocked back and forth. I mean, the thing was awful. It was developed by LJN. It didn't work at all. But I mean, there was a million rip-off peripherals back then. I mean, if you didn't know someone that owned it and it looked cool on a store shelf and you brought it home, you were disappointed more times than not if it didn't have a Nintendo logo directly on it. So
I
definitely.
remember that now that you say that. I remember the Wii Fit
yeah,
too. Like
yeah, we
but that was like so cool. Like Nintendo has constantly innovated all these insane things that were like
yeah.
nobody asked for this, but we are all like everybody's like motion control, but we all bought a Wii. And like
Yeah.
so many, I mean, I went through so much shit to get a Wii and get that damn Wii Fit. Like it's
I waited overnight. First time I ever did that.
I
I
worked
waited for months to get one. It took me a while.
I worked in an electronics department of a department store during the Wii launch, and for 6 months after the Wii came out, I was fielding 4 to 7 calls every day asking if we had Wii's in stock. So
Mhm.
trust me.
When you first said that, I don't think it's your Canadian accent. I think it's just me. I thought you said the weed launch. I'm like, wait a minute, what
Oh
were
no,
they
that was
doing
in
in
October.
Canada?
That was October 2 years ago in Canada. The Wii
Like
launch.
it wasn't like that in Canada back then, was it?
Nope.
Yeah, I had forgotten, guys. I had forgotten about the Neo Geo, and I had forgotten about some of that old hardware before.
Yeah.
And that's what's crazy now is the accessibility options on a Microsoft is better on a hardware aspect than that. Sony
Yeah.
doesn't really have a lot of accessibility for hardware, but they've got really great software. So now we've got video games that legally blind people can play and people with
Mhm.
very specific. So it's wild how far we've come, gentlemen. Like,
Yeah. Just as a side note, there's minis available for both TurboGrafx and Neo Geo now.
really?
You can, yeah. I have a
I'll be looking into
TG16
that.
mini I use all the time. I had a TG16 growing up. I won it in like a really weird newspaper contest. And, where I grew up was a test market for the TG16, so they kind of were giving them away. But I've got the mini TG16. I think there's an entire console, a Neo Geo. It's just a joystick. It's an arcade stick with 6 buttons, and it's got all the ROMs like loaded right up. I think it's got, I'd say, a good 25, 30 titles there, most of which are fighting games, of course. But the Neo Geo's got a great library. Metal Slug, tons of SNK stuff on that is awesome. I think they have like an arcade stick mini for Neo Geo now, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm
I could be
getting
wrong.
one.
Yeah,
I'm getting one.
I don't know if they're
Um,
making them now, or you may have to resort to eBay, but I'm pretty sure it exists.
I'm gonna go look
Nice.
for that.
Very nice.
So
Yeah.
what I want to close with, you see, you keep making me think of things, Brad. This is what I want to close with. What's your favorite arcade game from like back in the day? Your favorite retro game where you would go to a place and take a
Mhm.
stack of quarters with you because you had to play this game for hours. What was it?
It's. I think we all have the same answer. It's Street Fighter 2. That was the one. Arcades growing up were great. I loved the Superman arcade. Was in that pizza place I always went to play arcade games. We'd wait for food, and there was a rotating stock of different arcade titles through there. Eventually, they did get a Neo Geo machine, so I could play Samurai Showdown, or Metal Slug was there. I love Last Blade. I don't know if anyone's played that one. That's a solid weapons-based fighter, but the Street Fighter 2 is the one. When that came out, we were just blown away by it. We lined up and waited and argued and back and forth about which is the best character, or could so and so beat. Oh yeah, yeah, will try to beat me if I'm Chun Li now. So that's the one. That's got to be the one.
That's the one. That's going to be our new slogan together. Zwan, what about you? Is that the one for you?
So I've always been garbage at fighting games. I always enjoy them. So Street Fighter 2, I agree, is definitely I think it's the overall one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I've got 3 even ones, and they're all weird choices. Hard Driving. I don't know if you guys remember Hard Driving.
Sure.
It was hard. It was like one of the hardest games I've ever played because it was realistic car driving, but it was 3D in the 90s. And it was every time I went to the mall, I was beg my parents to give me $5 in quarters. I'm going to go play in the arcade. And I always played that game because it was just like, it felt like you were learning how to drive with it practically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also cool because it always showed you a replay of the accident you had. And I always thought that was hilarious. It's like, I went over that stack of logs and crashed into that house. Amazing. Probably set up my whole love for the Burnout series. But I also loved the Simpsons arcade game.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was one of the first games that I ever saw where it looked like I was playing the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look back at it now, it doesn't really, but at the time, I'm like, holy crap, I'm controlling Homer.
Yeah.
And basically the same thing, like the X-Men arcade game, which came out at the same time. Same thing. It was literally the same game practically, but like, same idea. It looked like I was playing a cartoon, and that was the whole thing for me back in the day. Was like, if it looked like I was playing a cartoon, I would just fall in love with it. So those are my 3 tied favorite arcade games. I have a whole bunch of other arcade games that I remember, but those are the ones that I lived and died for, basically. So. I
have one in common with one of you. As a younger, more kid level, Galaga. I still love Galaga. I would play the shit I would love to have a Galaga arcade game. As like the teen era, like going to the skating rink and playing, it was all Area 51 and X-Men. Could not get enough. I would love to have all 3 of those arcades in my house one day.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's going to happen. So where just because some folks might be listening to this as a real podcast. So if you guys, Brad, if you could give people your handle in case folks want to find you and follow you for a lot of wholesome, fun game goodness.
Sure. You can find me. My handle is Toukz, Toukz. You can find me anywhere, Twitter, PSN, and I've had that handle since 1994. So.
Oh, okay.
Type that in, you'll find me.
All right, Zwan, what about you? What's the handle they can find you?
At Zwan Guy on Twitter, ZWANGUI, ZWAN for non-Canadians. Just follow me on Twitter if you guys want to. I talk about video games all the time.
Yeah, he talks
a lot. I
don't
tend to argue with people.
he talks a lot about them. And I will also post helpful links for you guys. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can check the pin post below and you'll find a link where you can find Brad and Zwan Guy. And I am Crystal. You can find me, if you care to, at C Smith Shine. So thanks so much for being here, guys, and for an awesome episode. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Go play some games. Listen to this goodness. Feel good in your heart.
Yep.
Video games are awesome. Go play some games and just love your fellow gamer.
100%.
All right.
Absolutely.
We will see you guys next week. Thanks everybody for watching and listening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.